It's deal season, right? And you've got Trump with the this might be we're almost dating ourselves at this point, but the 2000s era show Deal or No Deal with Howie Mandel. Interestingly, Trump was competing against that for ratings with The Apprentice and those other shows that were popular from the era. Probably did a guest host at one point or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised. But anyway, yeah, this is trying to get to the deal. You've got the key of what's going on these geopolitical discussions taking shape that we've cataloged on the weekly roundup, over the course of the year. But you saw Trump do a state visit to the UK to visit with King Charles and the royals, and discuss terms for a lot of things, right, going on. And then you also saw kind of a press conference with Keir Starmer today. Um, and then on the complement of that, you're trying to do two deals at once. Think of like a two-front war, right? You're trying to negotiate with the UK crown, right, and the Commonwealth for economic conditions, for some sort of agreement between the US and City of London. You've got the other side of that, those discussions, US negotiating trade with China, right? And those talks are taking place in Madrid. So what we don't know on the UK front are any terms coming out of anything that was agreed to or was progressed on specific topics of importance. What we did get from Trump in the press conference today was a sense of kind of a public statement of disappointment in Putin for the Ukraine peace negotiations, right? So kind of have to piece together through the tea leaves on what's actually going on with the U.S. UK on that side. But in general, kind of the tone coming out of that was pretty cordial, right? It wasn't adversarial. So if there was progress on something or certain things agreed to, we don't yet know what those were, but look for those shoes to drop in the coming weeks as we find out more, and then can piece together in retrospect what probably happened at those talks inside the castles and royal palaces and whatnot. And then in the Madrid talks, the U.S.-China front, you saw a couple of things. So going into that, you had China announced it was launching probes against U.S. semiconductor manufacturers, so Texas Instruments and Analog Devices. These are semiconductors like sensors. They're not quite as sophisticated as like the very state-of-the-art high-end like GPUs like NVIDIA is building for to handle like AI specific computation, model training, inference, all of that. Um, and what China did was basically like with these semiconductor production and manufacturers and protecting kind of the market share of its own homegrown supply, and tend to be state funded or state owned enterprises in the Chinese economy, how they generally do things. Basically protect those from the US based manufacturers and producers there who have, you know, high single digits to low teens kind of share of industry in the Chinese market. So these semiconductors are kind of more legacy. These are, as opposed to like state of the art, single digit, low nanometer type of chip design. These are like 40 nanometer. They're kind of older, more mass produced, more widely known how to get things done. So essentially here, China makes an aggressive move, pushing against US firms access or just ability to sell into its own China's own domestic market. Kind of similar to what we saw with the August developments for Nvidia and AMD being allowed to sell into the Chinese market. They're higher end or cutting edge or more cutting edge GPUs with a 15% revenue share. So instead of a tariff, like for accessing foreign firms accessing the domestic market. This was an agreement for U.S. firms to sell into the Chinese market. You call it like a reverse tariff, if you will. If you remember those
Yeah.
headlines from just a few weeks ago. So this is kind of in retaliation, tit for tat, publicly disclosed at this point is the TikTok ownership. So TikTok under ByteDance, a Chinese firm, their apps in the U that have access to the U.S. market. Um, this is this has been like a football that's been kicked around for almost 10 years now, it seems. But it seems like they're nearing some agreement for ByteDance to sell its U.S. Presence for TikTok to a consortium of tech companies, which would be or tech elites, if you will, whether it's
So
their
saying, I think it's like
individual
Andreessen
family.
Horowitz and yeah,
Yeah, Larry
Oracle.
Ellison, Oracle, etc. Um, so that's kind of the tit for tat. China saying like, okay, you can have this. U.S. has to give something up to China. What that thing is, we're going to find out later. But this is kind of the discuss. This is the development of what's happening on those U.S. talks with the China front. So still not in its long-term steady state. They're nowhere near done. But this is the latest um, in that sequence of events. Uh,
Yeah.
any any feedback there, Cameron? Any like how do you any color commentary how you see this?
I think the only thing for me is just the how big of an influence TikTok has, right? So for me, I'm a little bit younger. I've got friends or, siblings that are on that kind of younger age where most of their news is really it's TikTok, right? They're not watching Fox News for sure. And they're definitely not going to Wall Street Journal, they're not going to New York Times. They're just going through TikTok. Snapchat as well, surprisingly has kind of a news section as well. So, I think you're really just seeing a lot of this for older folks who maybe are seeing this saying, "Who cares about TikTok? Just ban the thing." Um, you kind of lose a lot of the younger generation if you just go ahead and do that, right? You're just
Yeah,
effectively banning the Fox News for a generation, so that's not really going to happen.
yeah. It was like oil in the 40s, 50s, etc. Talk about this analogy all the time with the book The Prize. Like you see the distribution matters, right? And that's what these companies, Shell, Exxon, et cetera, that's what they're in the business of, brings connecting supply with demand in your consumption markets. There's the same thing going on with, information at this point and social media. So we've reached the point where oil and gas were in the 1950s, dividing up resources, Saudi Aramco, all of that. Um, that's what's going on in the social media, kind of like information technology space at this point. So roughly pinpoint where we are, we'll see. So how your economy is holding up, where your sovereign debt levels are, both in terms of like the debt stack relative to your GDP, consumer prices in the economy, and interest rates on the debt, all of those things become like key variables for how each nation state who's a player in this global competition can operate. So these are like we're in an era of conflict and upheaval, and so like how those things progress, like your sovereign debt markets or your central bank's monetary policy, those are all key linchpins and like highly uh, fought after things as kind of weapons in this bigger game as everybody's going after the prize, right? And what is the prize? Well, I think if you think about social media, right, the prize is the eyeballs, right?
Right.
Being in front of your audience. Whereas like, all right, cable news over to or cable TV and the cable news kind of distribution pipelines took over your broadcast media or your, three outlet ABC, NBC, CBS kind of distribution that dominated from 1950 to mid 1980s. And then those took over, broadcast television took over from radio, which took over from telegraph and print journalism, like everything. So this is what everybody's fighting over. They're going after the prize. And when you view the prize as like, what are the key assets that everybody is going on? Like, go over what matters to a society or a nation state.